Hello and welcome to another Ben Listering conversation. Welcome along. How are you doing today? As you know, each week I chat to the great and good of the world in the UK to talk about their life story and career. And this week's guest, my heart's pounding. It's my first children's TV presenter guest. He was in the broom cupboard. He was on stations such as Real Radio and many more. And he was also on GMTV as a presenter. And he also worked for ITV for a little bit. And he was the weatherman as well on the Meridian show, and it's the one, the only. It's a privilege. It's an honour. It's always Larkin. It's Mr. Simon Parkin. Hello, Simon. Welcome along.
What a lovely introduction. It makes me feel very old when you listed all the things I've done. I've been around for so long. That's the trouble.
So, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. It's Friday. I don't know if we're allowed to say that, and it's been a nice week, and I'm just now in sort of nearly in weekend
Are
mode.
we in the Chris Evans murder Friday then?
Yeah, TFI Friday. Yeah, that's it.
At the time of
Well,
record,
TG. Yeah,
it's
TGI Friday. Thank goodness.
it's the at the time of recording, it is the time that TFI's Friday in the old time slot 30 years ago.
Oh yes, of course. Yeah, yeah, yeah. What a groundbreaking show that was as well.
Did you ever watch it?
I did well, to be honest, back then there wasn't the TV that there is now. So everybody watched it. It was either that or the news because of the time that it was on, and the news was a bit boring, wasn't it?
Yeah, I had somebody who worked with Chris Evans back on his Radio 1 and Virgin Breakfast shows, Dan McGrath.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. He now does the music for Strictly, doesn't he?
Yeah, and he's a
Yeah.
good friend of mine, Dan. And I interviewed him, and some of the stories he told me about that time with Chris just made you want to laugh.
I met Chris many, many, many years ago. One of his first forays into radio was as a helper on the Timmy Mallett show, and I interviewed Timmy Mallett for my hospital radio program. And so Chris was there under the guise of Nobby No Levels, which was the character that he played, and then he became a presenter in his own right. And even way back then, he just had a brilliant energy and a brilliant personality. And you kind of just, I mean, crikey, even he wouldn't have known how it was going to go in the future, but you just could tell that he had something special.
Yeah. So we're here to chat about your journey today. So I'm just going to shut up and let you talk. Where did it begin for
Okay.
you?
All right. Well, it started for me as a listener to the radio. I can remember listening to Radio One, and it was Noel Edmonds on the Breakfast Show, and thinking, "Wow, that sounds like a really good job." And then Noel Edmonds became a presenter on the TV. He was doing a show called Swap Shop on a Saturday morning, and it just looked like the dream career. And so my mum and dad had Reader's Digest. You won't remember Reader's Digest, but they used to send out a book every week, and they also used to sell records, and the records were in boxes, and you had one that was like all of the 60s. So one album was 1960, one was 1961, one was 1962. And so I used to sit in the front room at the radiogram, which was the record player that we had in the house, and I would put the record on, and in the gaps in between the tracks where the needle would go silent for a little bit, I would do a DJ link and then introduce the next record, and it sort of built from there really, and I just sort of knew it was something that I wanted to do.
Yeah. And what was it like being a young DJ back then? And what
Well,
was
it was very hard, to be honest, because the only place that you could go and be a DJ was on hospital radio, and hospital radio had quite strict rules about how young you weren't allowed to be. So I was very fortunate that where I lived, a hospital radio station opened at my local hospital. And so myself and a friend of mine from school, Phil Trow, who is still a fantastic broadcaster, he works on BBC Radio Manchester now. We were able to join at a time when we were the kids, and so we managed to kind of find a way of getting on the air on a children's program. And so that was an amazing thing. There we were doing what we thought was radio. Obviously, we were learning the very basics of what became radio careers, but that was how you did it. And there were only a handful of stations at that time. You had your four national ones with the BBC, and then you had a handful of commercial stations in various different places and a handful of BBC stations, and that was it. There was no YouTube, so you couldn't sort of do your own content or anything like that. So you had to just keep sending off the tapes to all of these radio stations and never get anywhere. I've still got a massive pile of rejection letters until eventually one station said, "Yes, come and have an interview," and that was Radio Tees, based in Stockton on Tees. up in the northeast of England, and I went up and did an audition, and I probably wasn't very good, but they saw something in me, and then I got a job there, and it was I cannot tell you how amazing it was. It was like a lottery win to be going and working on an actual proper radio station that my mum and dad could sit in the car. They drove Teesside to Manchester, is where I was sort of born and brought up, and my mum and dad drove to the top of the Pennines where they could pick it up and listen to me on the radio. And that was, it was mind blowing. This is 1987, to think that I was sitting in a box in Stockton-on-Tees and my mum and dad were listening to it somewhere in Yorkshire, and I was doing what I always wanted to do. Amazing.
Nice, and it's brilliant. And what was it like being on Radio Tees?
Radio Tees was great. It was a really nice station. It had been massive when it launched, as a lot of commercial radio stations had been, and then it had had a bit of a tougher time. But the people who had worked at Radio Tees before I got there were legends of broadcasting. So people like Paul Robinson, who went on to become management at Radio 1, and then he worked at Disney. He was there. John Myers, John Simons, who
Alex
went on to
Lester.
Alex Lester. Yeah, they were all there. So the station had a massive, fantastic heritage. And then I'll be honest, I didn't know very much about the area, and we didn't have the internet, so I wasn't able to sort of, sneakily learn via reading stuff on Wikipedia. So I just had to learn from being there. But the team that were there at the time that I was there, the boss, my immediate boss, was a broadcaster called Peter Craig, sadly no longer with us. It was brilliant. And Andy Hollins, who now lives in LA and does sort of broadcast stuff out there. He was a really good person to befriend me, teach me how to sort of settle into a professional radio station and guide me. And, I was very lucky that I was at a station where you were allowed to experiment, you were allowed to try stuff. They obviously, there were bosses who said, "Oh no, do that, play these songs, keep all this going," but equally there was enough freedom for me to find my feet at my own rate, and thankfully it all sort of turned out all right.
Nice. And you were only at Radio Tees for a few months. And what was it like being on the radio? And how did your first big gig come at the mighty BBC Children's TV, one of the first original ones with greats such as and I'm tempted to say Andy Crane was in the
Yeah,
broom
no, Andy
cupboard.
Crane was there. Andy Crane was there. Yeah, no, it's all thanks to Radio Tees and a colleague of mine at Radio Tees, a wonderful man called Mark Matthews, who was he'd been there for a few years, and he was very much the kind of star of the station. And he did a program that was on Saturday morning, 6 till 10. I then did a chart show that was on 10 till 12. And then Andy Hollins came in and did 12 till 2. And so I got in one morning and I would read the newspapers. And there was a story about Philip Schofield at that time was doing the children's BBC in the afternoons. And the story was he's moving to Saturday mornings. And so they're looking for somebody new to do the broom cupboard. Now I knew my friend Mark Matthews wanted to be on TV. He would have loved to be able to diversify. And so I said, "Oh, you should go for this." And he said, "Oh no, I don't think so. It's not very me." So then 2 hours later, when Andy Hollins came in, I was kind of having a bit of a slagging off and said, "I can't believe Mark doesn't want to go for this." And Andy Hollins said, "Well, why don't you go for it?" And it just so happens that Andy Hollins had auditioned for the broom cupboard when Andy Crane got the job. And he said, "Right, scroll down a telephone number and said, phone this man at the BBC." And I didn't. I absolutely thought, "Well, I can't phone this man. I can't do that." And so I sat on this phone number for a few days. And then I think I had a bad day at work where the program didn't go very well. The boss was a bit sort of sniffy about stuff I'd done. And so I thought, right, okay, so I am going to phone the BBC. So I called the number, and a very lovely man called Pat Hubbard, BBC presentation, answered the phone. And he said, "No, no, don't believe everything you read in the paper. No, we're not looking for anybody at all. But what do you do?" And so I told him that I was a radio DJ up in the northeast. And he said, "Right, well, when are you next in London?" Is what he said to me. And I didn't ever regularly go to London, so I said, "Well, I don't really come to London very much." And he said, "Well, when's your next day off?" And I said, "Thursday," because that was my next day off. And he said, "Right, come down and have a look around." And so I was so delighted that I was going to go into Television Centre, the round building that I'd seen on Tomorrow's World and on Blue Peter. And so I got the train down from Darlington to London, went to Television Centre, was greeted at the gates by the commissionaires, and my name was on a list, and I was allowed inside the building. And then I met Pat Hubbard, who was a very lovely man who took me for a look around. So we went into all of the studios, and I mean, I was just kind of beside myself with how amazing this was just to be in the building. And Pat then said, "Would you mind if I put you in a studio and see how you do?" And I said, "No, absolutely not." So he sat me in a studio, put an earpiece in my ear, clipped a microphone onto me. Then he went off into the gallery and he just asked me a few questions. Tell me what you do. Can you do this? Talk for this. Tell me about that. And then I then finished doing whatever we were doing. And he then came into the studio and said, "Oh, I'm very sorry. I really should have given you forewarning that I was going to audition you, but you did great. Do you want to come and work here?" And it was as simple and lucky as that. And I'm fairly sure it's all down to the day that I made the phone call. And Pat was clearly in a lovely mood at that moment. Whether he'd had a liquid lunch or not, we'll never know. But if he hadn't answered the phone and been receptive to me and said, "Right, come down to London," and forced me into coming down on that Thursday, then it would have been very different. But I was so fortunate that it all happened like that. And then I was doing children's BBC over the Christmas holidays in the mornings in the broom cupboard, to go and do a few pieces to sort of launch me, and then do 2 weeks of Christmas holidays in the mornings. And looking back now, it is just such an amazing opportunity. Looking back now, the videos are terrible. So I'm so lucky that again they kept bringing me back for Easter and then for the summer. And then by then I was sort of learning how to do TV. But just as I say, more luck and timing than anything else kind of got me there.
And you also had on the other side ITV with on the other side with children's TV, Nino Ferretu, who was doing it on ITV.
Yeah, children's TV at that point was massive, largely because there was just your four terrestrial channels and nothing else. Satellite was just in its very, very infant period. So there were a few things that sort of popped up with, Pat Sharp was massive on one of the music channels that was big in Europe and also broadcast in this country. But essentially, you only had BBC One, BBC Two, ITV, and Channel 4. And children would come in from school and the telly was theirs for a couple of hours in the afternoon. And in that diet of TV that they were fed would be dramas, would be news programs, would be programs that would make them think, documentaries, comedies, funny stuff. And so it was sort of essential viewing. And the way that both children's BBC and children's ITV set up their way of doing, right, we own the telly now for this hour and a half, it felt very like a kind of a club that people wanted to be in. And certainly because Philip Schofield had set such an incredible standard of the links around the programmes on the BBC, followed by Andy Crane. I was there at a glorious time when also Neighbours was starting to be broadcast at tea times, and that got something like 12 million viewers. So 12 million people would watch us. So we were very lucky again to be in that situation where people just kind of watched it, liked it, maybe didn't like it, but couldn't miss it because Neighbours was coming on. And so we just had a ball.
So technically, you were Kylie and Jason's warmer pact.
Yes, exactly. We were we were there to kind of get the audience ready for the main event, which was
Where
Kylie
were
and
you
Jason.
on the day of their wedding? Were you on there?
I think it was 1988, their wedding. I cannot for the life of me remember. I was certainly working at the BBC at that point, but I cannot remember. I don't think I did the link into it. I think that would have been an Andy Crane. I did a lot of morning stuff. He did a lot of afternoon stuff. And so he probably was the man who was there on that day when Lenny and Scott got married on Neighbours. What a day.
Charlene, you mean?
Well, she was called Lenny. She was Charlene, but it was shortened to Lenny. Everyone used to call her Lenny.
I didn't know that.
There you go. And obviously with an Australian pronunciation, it was sort of Linny is kind of how it came out. But yeah, Charlene was Lenny.
Brilliant. And as we know, it was a brilliant time back then, and Neighbours was good. And what was it like being Scott and Charlene and the lovely Anne Charleston, who was in Neighbours as well? What was it like being their warmer pact?
Well, it was lovely, and less so Anne Charleston, who I only met many, many years later, but
Have you
Kylie and
ever met?
Jason.
Kylie or
Yeah,
Jason?
both of them many times because they were bringing out the records. And if you were a pop star at that point, you wanted to get your records on TV, and the way you did that was going on the children's programs. So yeah, no, we had Kylie, we had Jason, we had all of the Stock Aitken and Waterman stars coming our way. Lots of different pop
Did
stars
you
from the day would come
did
in.
you ever get Mr. Waterman himself?
We did. Well, we did. Here we go. Here's a great name drop for you. So we did children's BBC. Was the broom cupboard was the afternoon, and in the holidays we did something called BFT. But first, this is what it stood for. And one year, our But First This theme was specially commissioned from Stock Aitken and Waterman, and so Andy Peters did the deal because he was a good wheeler dealer, and so he got Pete to write a tune, and Stock Aitken and Waterman recorded it, and that was the theme to our show. So yeah, we were very close to all of that. Stock Aitken and Waterman, all of the pop star action, and because we were in television centre, all of the big stars of the day would be in on a Thursday for Top of the Pops, and so it just was happening around us, and we were kind of a little part of it as
Did
well.
you ever
Amazing.
get to meet any of the Radio 1 guys? Because some of them presented Top of the Pops.
Yeah, we met lots of the Radio 1 guys again because of the Top of the Pops connection. There was also a BBC magazine called Fast Forward that was out at the time. There was a bit like Luckin, but it was a BBC one, and so the Radio 1 DJs would be in that, and so would we. You would go to gigs. We got invited to all of the music gigs, and so you would bump into Bruno Brooks and Gary Davis and Mark Goodier there. So yeah,
Lynn
no, it was
Parson as
Lynn
well.
Part. Oh, Lynn, we know very well. Lynn is lovely. Yeah. So yeah, there was a really lovely kind of synergy between all of the bits of the BBC, and we were part of it. It was great.
Yeah, and it's brilliant. And did you ever get to meet the Mr. Scohfield or
I did indeed. Yeah. No. Philip was very lovely when I started. Andy Crane was great when I started. They
and
were very supportive and very friendly, and sort of helped me because I knew nothing about television. I'd been practicing in my bedroom for years and years and years, but to actually be on the TV was a bit of a weird one. And also the broom cupboard was it was a fixed camera in a room where there were about 1,000 monitors. So it was very hard to remember to look at the camera and not at some of the TV screens that were in there. And so you kind of, you were guided by people like Andy and Philip. And then Andy Peters came along, and he just, something about Andy, he just knows how to do TV amazingly. And so he kind of taught me how to refine what I was doing and make it better. And we didn't know the word mentor back then, but that's precisely what he was.
not the Andy Peters, surely.
The Andy Peters
The one
was
who did Blue Peter,
he
was in charge of T4 for a
yeah.
little bit. That one.
Well, he never did Blue Peter, but he did Live and Kicking, and he did lots of other programs as well. But yeah, he was in charge of. He became a grown up and went behind the scenes, and he produced Gladiators at ITV and all of the In Audience With programs. He was brilliant behind the screens because he knows how to make
And he
TV
was
work,
brilliant on the screen as well.
and still doing
Still
really
doing
well
well,
on
yeah.
Good Morning Britain. No, Andy is a lovely man, and he
Yeah.
is. I like to say, he was working with Andy. We had a really good couple of years where we were kind of co-hosts, and we got on great, and we fed off each other. And as I say, what I learned from Andy is what sort of stood me in good stead for a TV career that has touch wood lasted.
Yeah, and it's brilliant. And what was it like being at the Children's Television Centre? And what was it? Did you feel the history and
Oh, you did? Well, you didn't need to feel the history because while I was working there, I would go there every day for work. There would be lots of famous people would be in television centre every morning. Myself and Andy Peters, we would get to work. We'd do there would be the birthday cards that we do in the morning, and we would then go down to television centre main reception, and we would say to the lovely team on reception, "Oh, what's in today?" And they would give us this clipboard that had the details of Studio One, it's this, Studio Two, it's that, Studio Three is this, and we would look and see who was in that day, and we would go. And so I was there for the pilot of Bottom with Rick Mail and Adrian Edmondson. I went there on the day that they were filming the first one of those. The pilot of Absolutely Fabulous, the Jennifer Saunders show. I went in, snuck into Television Centre. Once you were in the building, you could go anywhere you liked. And so we would go, like I say, Top of the Pops would be on, Noel's House Party on a Saturday would be on. You could just go there. So all of the history was happening in real time, as well as obviously the greats. So like Bruce Forsyth was doing the Generation Game again. He'd been to ITV and come back again,
So
and so you
Terry,
would bump into Bruce Forsyth. Terry was different because he was done his show Wogan, the thrice weekly chat show, was done round the corner at the Television Theatre in Shepherd's Bush. So Terry wouldn't really be in television centre, so you didn't really get to see Terry very much. But he was close enough. He was absolutely close enough.
did you ever get to meet Wergen?
I did. I met him a couple of times. He was very lovely. I also did some Children in Needs. I did when Children in Need was back in the day was a show that had more regional inputs. So I used to do the East Midlands region for a couple of years, and so I would be Terry would say, "Let's go over to the East Midlands. Here's Simon Parkin." I mean, that's just again mind blowing. You're standing there thinking, "My God, I'm on BBC One, and this is Terry Wogan actually talking to me."
The
Unbelievable.
master of radio, the master of
Master of
TV, the
everything.
master of everything he was, and he's
Quite
still
no,
missed to this day. And as well
absolutely.
as that, you also did Onzo, but
Oh,
this
ozone, ozone,
Ozone,
ozone. Yeah,
but first this on
yeah.
BBC, CBBC, CBBC, and Top of the Pops. Did you host a few editions of Top of the
I
Pops?
did a couple of Top of the Pops. Yes, I did. I had
Who
to
was
audition.
your leading
Uh,
person,
my
your
co-host,
co-host?
my co-host was Mark Goodier, and Mark. The lovely thing about Mark Goodier is that when I was at Radio Tees, Mark was up the road at Metro Radio. Metro Radio owned both the station in Newcastle, which was Metro, which is the one that Mark was at, and I was at Radio Tees, which was owned by Metro, and we both came down at exactly the same time. So I started on Children's BBC Christmas 1987, and Mark came down to Radio 1 Christmas 1987. So again, Mark was one of those lovely people that would support me, give me advice, help me in all sorts of things, not just broadcasting stuff. He helped me when I was buying a house, he helped me get a mortgage. And when I needed a mobile phone, he was like, right, here's the man to talk to. And Mark was lovely. And so to do Top of the Pops with Mark felt so comfortable because he was great, he was lovely, and he again helped me through. Top of the Pops was a really different kind of animal in that we did it as live. The links were only 10 seconds. Nobody said this is what we need you to do. They literally just went, right, here's the camera, 3, 2, 1, go. And so you had to sort of make it up as you went along. So that was quite an incredible thing. And to do Top of the Pops, the couple of Top of the Pops that I did, we had some amazing stars on. REM, I introduced the first appearance of REM on Top of the Pops. We had Paul McCartney doing a song on Top of the Pops, so I was in the presence of rock and pop royalty.
And, and who is that? Samaka, as
Samaka, yep, Paul
James
McCartney,
Corden
yeah,
calls him.
yeah, and I spent a little bit of time with Paul McCartney. I was so blessed and so lucky.
That's
He we were doing for the program for my children's program. We were doing a sort of a behind the scenes thing of Top of the Pops, and we knew Paul McCartney was coming in, and Paul McCartney on camera came up to me and said, "Hello, you're Simon, aren't you?" And I was like, "Oh my God," completely taken aback. This is Paul McCartney saying hello to me. And I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "Oh, I've always wanted to meet you." And I said, "Really?" And he said, "No, I just thought it'd sound good." And that was the start of a conversation with Paul McCartney. He also did a bit for the Ozone, which was a pop program that we did on Children's BBC. And myself and Andy Peters escorted him to the Blue Peter Garden and chatted all the way. And then the interview happened, and we walked him all the way back. And then he did the Top of the Pops in the evening. And my dad was he'd come to see what I do to prove that I had a proper job. And so my dad was watching Top of the Pops that night. So at the end of Paul McCartney's song, I'm standing next to my dad, just in the corner of the studio. Paul McCartney does his song, rapturous applause, comes off stage, walks over to me and my dad, introduces himself to my dad, and says, "You must be really proud of your son." And so I'm thinking, my God, this is Paul McCartney saying all of this. So just the most lovely man. And to be honest, most of the people that I met at that time at Children's BBC, whether they were pop stars, whether they were other television presenters, whether they were legendary producers, of which there were many at the BBC, or the team who would be there every day, everyone was so lovely. And it was such a brilliant atmosphere. And the creativity oozed out of the fact that everyone just wanted to have fun, have a laugh, and make it brilliant.
Brilliant. And you were also on as well BBC London's station GLR, and you were also nationally on Five Live.
Well, it was called Radio 5 originally. I wasn't on 5 Live, I was on Radio 5. When Radio 5 launched, it was a bit of a mishmash. And so they had the old Radio 2 medium wave frequencies. So they had all of the sport that Radio 2 had previously done but weren't going to do anymore. They had children's programs, which is why I was there. And they also had sort of a newsy morning show that then they realised was perhaps not quite the right fit yet, and that's when Danny Baker came in, and so he did the breakfast show on old Radio 5. There were kind of pop quiz shows and all that kind of stuff, and so I got to do some children's programs there, and again that was brilliant, as much as anything else, based on the fact that I got to go into Broadcasting House and go into a studio in Broadcasting House and broadcast to the nation, which is what the young me had grown up seeing Noel Edmonds doing and thinking that's what I want to go and do. So
And
again, I was blessed.
I'm guessing you probably got to meet the late Steve Wright at some point.
I met Steve a few times. Steve was absolutely lovely, very, very, very similar to what he was like on the radio, but equally dead normal. I had a couple of conversations with Steve at places that weren't broadcasting studios, places that weren't working. He was just the most lovely, normal person you
What's
could
the
ever wish to meet.
most funniest story he's ever told you?
Um, it wasn't a funny story. It was just a very weird one where after he died, it then everyone sort of started mentioning. But I went. I was lucky enough to be invited onto his afternoon show. He used to do when he was on. I think it was Radio 2 still, and it was a feature that they used to do, like a little round table where they would get celebrities in to review songs. How he ended up with me, I've got no idea, but he did. And so it was myself and a wonderful actress called Una Stubbs, who, I mean, she'd been in movies for years and years and years. She was in the show Sherlock with Martin Freeman and Benedict
Benedict
Cumberbatch.
Cumberbatch.
Um, she was the landlady, and she'd done a show called Wurzel Gummidge, which was amazing in its day. And so there's myself and Eunice Stubbs, and we did this thing on the radio, and it's pre-recorded in the morning for Steve's show to go out that afternoon. And so then in the bit in between, Steve and I were just having a chat, and he said he just randomly said to me, "Do you ever go to the dentist?" And I said, "Yeah, no, yeah, I do. I check up every now and again, and occasionally fill them. I never go to the dentist myself. Do all my fillings myself," he said. When you think, what a funny thing to be talking about. And then, as I say, subsequently after he died, that was one of the things that people talked about, because Steve, in his unique way, did things the Steve Wright way, and so there I was talking to him about doing do-it-yourself fillings. I have since done do-it-yourself fillings when a filling has dropped out, and I always think of Steve when I'm going, it's not sticking in. Well, this is a waste of time. This is rubbish. So he must have had some sort of skill, some sort of dental skill. But no, Steve, very lovely man.
Yeah, it was lovely, and I've heard lots of stories about him because my voiceover for this show used to be his voiceover, and he used to do the voice of Sid the manager as well, Gavin McCoy,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
who's
I
another
know of Gavin. I've never met him, but I know
who's
of him.
another great person. I think he was similarly part of the Real Radio Group, but he ran the smooth side of things back in the day in
Yes,
London.
yeah, I think he was. Yeah, he's smooth in London. Yeah.
Yeah, he did all that. And there's a story on Lynn Parsons' edition which involves Rick Mail, where he licked the window and scared her half to death.
Which
And
you can imagine it would. So,
what was your favourite interview? And did you ever get what was your favourite Kylie conversation you ever had, or Jason Donovan conversation?
they sort of all blur a bit because we sort of met them fairly frequently. I had lovely conversations with Kylie. I had lovely conversations with Jason, in actually in work mode as well as in real life. I can remember going to Danny Minogue's birthday party. I think it must have, well, would have been her 21st, maybe. I can't remember. And there was sort of a sort of a secret tea in London. And I just remember chatting to both Kylie and Jason that night. And again, one of those weird moments where you think, "Oh, funny thing to be invited to." And here I am talking to these very lovely people who, everyone is just normal. And you're all just sort of getting on and you're doing your job. And for Kylie and Jason, and I have talked to Jason in more recent times, a couple of years ago, when he was doing one of his tours and talking about how busy they were, because they were obviously they were bringing out the records and there was an appetite for more records, so they had to keep doing the albums. And back then, you would do a little tour to sell the albums, and that's how pop stars made their money. And then there would be, you got to do all of this in Germany and you got to do all of it in France. And so they would just be constantly working. And, at the time, I don't think we appreciated how hard they would be working. But to look back now, they must have never stopped. They must have been in places where they had no idea where they were and what they were doing. They were just sort of, right, propped up in a hotel here, taken to a studio there. But, Kylie and Jason, as I said earlier, whenever I was in their company, were just so lovely. And so there was never a hint of, we're really tired. This is, another interview, can't be bothered. It was just a very lovely experience. I suspect it was quite helpful as well that we were all of a similar age. So, we were sort of all in it together, albeit in varying degrees of the success that they had and the work that they had to do. But there was a sort of a mutual understanding of, this is a good time that we're all having here. We're working hard, but it's great.
Brilliant. And also, I also know that down in the down, I also did see a neighbours actress once, I admit, in Exeter St David's train station, but I didn't interact with her.
And who was that?
Holly Valance.
Oh, Holly Valance. Yeah, I think she lives in this country now, doesn't she?
Yeah, I think I did see her in Exeter train station, but I didn't go over and say hello.
Is that because you were too shy?
Yeah, because I didn't know if it was her, but I didn't want to because she was on the telephone.
Yeah, oh no, yeah, you don't want to interrupt a telephone call. Certainly not.
Because she was, and the funny thing was, I was watching an episode of Neighbours on the phone on the tablet at the time that she was in.
How funny.
Yeah, yeah, it's a weird world, and as I say, yeah, with everything. What was it like also going to the broadcasting house, and who was your favorite? Who was on GLR at that time? And that
GLR, well, I stood in for Chris Evans. So Chris Evans was doing the evening show.
did you do it with
And
Dan
so,
or John?
no, I don't think Dan or John were part of that evening setup. It was the person who was producing me was Wendy Lloyd, who went on to become a broadcaster in her own right and has done loads of amazing things. And so I was standing in for Chris. So before me was Tommy Vance, who was a broadcasting legend. And after me was Andy Peebles, who was a broadcasting legend. And around at the time were Johnny Walker and Anne Nightingale. There was a day I had a mobile phone, and I can remember I had to go in the daytime to do a pre-record for something that was going out that evening, and I'd left my mobile phone in the office, and I came back to the office having done my pre-record to find Johnny Walker talking to Anne Nightingale about how mobile phones worked using mine as the prop. And again, it was one of those moments where I'm thinking, wow, these are two proper bona fide broadcasting legends who are just standing 3 inches away from me talking about my mobile phone. What a thing.
A good friend of mine who worked down the road, down the next county along in Devon, David Fitzgerald, who worked at the BBC in Devon. He told me the story about when he was working with Simon Bates and Simon Bates radio. You know Simon Bates
I do know Simon Bates, yeah.
personally, or
Yep.
he was shouting about his glasses and they were on his head. And then
We've all had moments like that.
and then he was screaming the next day because the king and queen, who are now the king and queen, were in the building, and he was huffing and puffing because they thought they were on about his glasses, losing his glasses because they were saying they lose theirs, and they realised they're on the head. And Simon Bates nearly went jerkingly mental in front of the king and queen.
Simon Bates has always been ever so lovely in the time that I've spent with him. He is he again I'd sort of met him whilst he was at Radio One, and he was always very friendly and very chatty. And I then worked at a station called Liberty Radio, where Simon did the daily breakfast show and I did the weekend breakfast show there. and so I knew him a little bit there as well. And he doesn't live very far from where I live now, and so we have occasional text messages, and I haven't seen him for years and years and years. But Simon is very lovely, very lovely. What an amazing broadcaster! What an amazing career!
Yeah, brilliant. And after that, after Five Live, in true Darth Vader style, it says here on my information guide, you load over to ITV in
Yeah.
1992.
I crossed over to the dark side. Yeah, and it was an amazing, again, an amazing time. GMTV back in the day it wasn't just a TV show, it was a whole actual TV channel. So that was when ITV was made up of lots of different companies. And TVAM had been doing ITV Breakfast for the first 10 years, and they then lost the franchise in a very weird kind of franchise bidding war, and GMTV won it. And so I was then brought over to go and do the children's programs on GMTV. And in the lead up to us going on air, we went on air on January the 1st, 1993. And in the lead up to going on air, we were doing pilots every day, pretend shows. Eamon Holmes was one of the presenters. Lorraine Kelly obviously was there at the start. Two amazing presenters. Fiona Armstrong was the main female presenter, and Michael Wilson was the main male presenter. And everyone again was really lovely, and they were proper grown-ups doing proper news programs, and I was this sort of spotty child coming in and doing the kids stuff. But everyone was so welcoming, everyone was so lovely, and it was amazing to be there for the launch of an actual TV network. And it was in the London Weekend Television building on the South Bank, which the one that Ant and Dec did their show from, with the big tower and stuff, and where This Morning used to come from. And so to go from Television Centre and the BBC to then go to this amazing building that again was steeped in history, the programmes that had been made there, Game for a Laugh and Beadle's About and Cilla Black's Blind Date were all
And,
made in those studios. And so it was just incredible.
and, and the radio colleague of mine who does stuff on an 80s show on the network, syndication like man, he remembers going to see me and him have had this conversation every time we see each other at the radio stations if we're recording something. We have this conversation. He went to one gig. He went to see Tony Hadley at one of the ITV studios.
Ah, okay. Yeah, Tony Hadley from Spandau Ballet. Yeah,
Yeah,
that
it
he's
was all
great.
of them.
Yeah.
It was the Kemp brothers as well.
Oh wow, how
And he
amazing! What a
got a
lovely
pic,
thing.
and his career highlight, he says it wasn't interviewing Christopher Dean, it was just getting a picture with his musical hero, Tony Hadley. Have you ever met Tony Hadley?
I No, I don't think I have. I don't think I have. I've definitely interviewed Martin Kemp, but I don't think I've met Tony. No, I don't think so.
You ever met Mr. Kemp?
I did him down a Zoom. It was COVID times. But he was lovely. But no, I haven't met Gary, but only Martin.
You've not met Roman then?
I haven't met Roman. I have met Ross. Oh, hang on, wait a minute. He's not one of the brothers, is he?
He,
Right, hang on.
he's an he's another bloke.
Yeah, he's a different Kemp. Different,
Yeah.
different Kemp.
Yeah, it's brilliant, and yeah, and it's good. And you do also do, as well as that in ITV, it's GMTV. Did you work with the lovely Fiona Phillips as well, and her husband Martin?
I
Was it
did. I
Martin
did.
Frizzell?
Martin Frizzell. Yeah, Martin was he was one of our most amazing journalists and reporters at that time, and Fiona was the showbiz reporter back then. So yeah, no, at the launch, all of the kind of people who went on to be staples at GMTV, most of them were already there at that time. So yeah, no, it was lovely to kind of be
And
there.
obviously Duncan Wood from my neck of the woods.
Yeah, Duncan. Now was he after me, or was he there at the start? I can't remember. I
He
cannot for the life
also
of me
did
remember.
ITV's calendar for a little bit
Ah, okay. Yeah.
up in
Yeah.
here, which is our news program
Yeah. Well, I used to work on ITV Meridian, the news program for down in the
with
southeast.
Fred.
So with Fred Dinage from How. So yeah.
Brilliant. And what was it like being on the ITV network? And did you ever do any children's TV at ITV?
I did the stuff I did at GMTV was sort of children's output, and so I then guested on a few shows that were on. There was a brilliant series that Yorkshire Television made called Go Getters, where they would get three teams of celebrities, and they would send them around the country to do. It was like a sort of a treasure hunt thing. So the year I did it, it was myself, the amazing Keith Chegwin, and Jenny Powell were in. We were in one van, and then you had Michaela Strachan was in one of the others with a guy called Les who was in Home and Away, which was obviously the big sort of ITV version of Neighbours at the time. Who else was on it? Bruno Brooks was on it. Craig Charles was on it. Andrea Boardman was on it, and so we were all competing against each other to go around the country in these branded vans that said ITV Go Getters on them. We started off in Paris, and some of the other teams. I think one was in Amsterdam. I forget where the third one would have been. Maybe Belgium, maybe. And then we all ended up back at the same place. And so that was a great program to be part of. Again, it was just this weird week where we were in a van by day, staying in the hotels by night, and I got to know Keith Chegwin very well, who was obviously one of my heroes growing up, and was the most lovely man, the most funny man, the loveliest, talented man. What we saw on telly from Keith Chegwin was only a fraction of what he was as a person. Just such a lovely man, and so
Yeah,
lucky again to have been in his
I
company.
remember him from the TV, and he was brilliant. And did you ever get to meet as well along your time at GMTV? Did you ever get to meet the lovely Kate Garraway?
Kate Garraway, I didn't meet. She was after my time. But when I went to work at ITV Meridian, Kate had been at Meridian, so everyone spoke very fondly of Kate. And obviously, she's doing brilliant now. Still there
She's
on
on
Good Morning Britain, and
and
she's on
Smooth
Smooth Radio, of course. Yeah, but
with one of my good friends follows her, Paul Fear,
yeah, Paul.
and
I know
one
Paul. I know
and
Paul.
one of my good friends is technically one of her warm up acts, not warm up acts, but he works with a Gary King.
Oh yeah, I know Gary not terribly well, but again, he was
He's
at
the
Radio
vo-
One.
he
He
was the
was at
voice
Radio.
of Funhouse as well.
Yeah, yeah.
With
Gary was at Radio One when I was doing children's BBC. So I again our paths crossed at a few sort of BBC things.
yeah, and obviously Lynn as well, Lynn, the lovely Lynn
Lynn
Parson as
Parsons,
well.
the lovely Lynn Parsons. I've known Lynn for all of my life. It feels like, but Lynn has been she's such an amazing person.
Yeah, she's told me a lot of funny stories, and her time at Radio 2 was one of my favourites because it was actually an interview with Parky that got her the gig. It was an interview with Parky and Samaka that got her the gig.
Oh, how amazing! Yeah,
And
no,
she
Lynn is
says that
brilliant.
story, and it made me cry because it was Parky who actually helped to get onto Radio 2 without help, without any nudge. It was just an interview she was listening to with Parky and Samaka. Did you ever get to meet the great Parky?
I Now, did I meet Michael Parkinson? I'm not sure that I did. I don't know. I auditioned for a TV show that he did. There was a bit of a period where he'd gone from the BBC on the chat show to TVAM, the breakfast company, to launch, and then ITV sort of didn't quite know what to do with him, and so that's when he did Give Us a Clue, which was the program where they did charades on the telly, and he also did Sunday night. It was kind of like a consumery show, and I auditioned for that. I don't know if he was at the audition though. I cannot for the life of me remember. But I certainly, if I was in his company, I wouldn't have dared speak to him because I'd have been too in awe of the man.
Yeah, I'd have, because I remember the last ever interview we did. We'll go back to your radio and TV bits in a sec, but I remember the last ever interview we did, last ever show we did, and it was Billy Connolly, and Billy Connolly was just getting him drunk because and it's
Well,
good,
they were
and
proper good mates, weren't they?
yeah, and it made me laugh. And you presented on Yorkshire Television, Granada, HTV, West Country, Meridian. Did you ever do CITV with Daniel Lord Stephen?
I didn't. No, I never did, and I never guested on it even. So no, I never. I knew it was based in the Midlands,
Did you ever
but
get
and
to meet Stephen or Danielle?
I no, I don't think I have. No, I don't think so.
Yeah, and also you forgot. Did you ever get to meet Paul McKenna?
Paul McKenna. I did meet Paul McKenna, and I saw his amazing hypnotism show live on stage. He again when GMTV launched, that was when he did his ITV hypnotism show. So yeah, no, I met Paul a couple of times. Again, very lovely man.
He didn't try and hypnotize you, did he?
Well, who's to say that he didn't? And now if maybe someone, if they say the word chicken, maybe something weird happens. But I'm unaware of it because whatever magic he worked it. But no, I didn't. I was never knowingly, and I don't think he's. I think he's ethically bound to not do unknowing hypnotism. So no, I don't think he did.
And who would he? I know McKenna, obviously, but who would? Yeah, and it's good. And you obviously did a bit of ITV in Chiltern briefly as well. You did a little bit at Chiltern, but your real radio landing was at Real Radio in Cardiff.
Yeah, South Wales, Real Radio South Wales, it was called, and then in the time I was there, it became Real Radio Wales as the station
How did you
expanded.
end up on Real?
I was
It was
I
unreal.
Yeah, it was unreal. So I was working in at a small radio station called Bath FM, which was in the city of Bath because I live in Somerset, and so I was doing the breakfast show there, and it was great and it was lovely. But over the water, this station called Real Radio launched, and John Myers, under the guise of John Morgan and John Simons, used to do a Sunday lunchtime program called Fun on the Phones. And I so vividly remember that hearing it launch, and a friend of mine called Adrian Allen was one of the launch presenters there. And so I sort of knew about it, and then I listened to it, and I was building some flat pack shelves in my living room in my house in Somerset one Sunday lunchtime, listening to John Myers and John Morgan, sorry, John Morgan and John Simons, as they were on the air, the two Johns, doing this program called Fun on the Phones. And I was thinking, my God, this is amazing. The style of radio, the bigness of the station, the way that they held no prisoners. They were just having a laugh. They were taking the mickey out of the BBC in Wales, who had a massive audience at that time. This was the young upstart station that had just turned up. And John Myers, as John Morgan, because he had a different name on air and off air, made a brilliant joke. He said, my son has asked for a cowboy outfit for Christmas, so I've bought him Radio Wales. And I thought, God, what an amazing, that no one dared ever make a joke about the competition on radio at that point. And there he was, the boss of the station, taking the mickey out of it on this station that had only just launched. No one knew it was going to be a massive success. And so I wrote to John Simons, knowing he was the program controller. And the letter I wrote said, I've heard your station launch. I'm not having much fun where I'm working, but it sounds like your presenters have fun. So please, can I come and work for you? And thankfully, the old Radio Tees connection, it all leads back to Radio Tees. I was able to go in and meet John Simons, and we sort of had a bit of a chat about Radio Tees, even though we weren't there at the same time, but we had a bit of a shared history. And he was familiar with my work and the stuff that I'd done subsequently. And so he said, yeah, you can come and do some overnights here. And so I did a couple of overnights. And then I ended up doing weekend evenings whilst I was still doing the breakfast show on Bath FM. And then there was a full-time job for me. And so then I went there and did evenings and had the most amazing, I think it was the best part of sort of 4 or 5 years I was at Real Radio. And I was doing evenings was my sort of staple show. And then I would stand in for the breakfast show. I'd stand in for Chris Moore in the daytime. I'd stand in on drive time. And in that time, the station had the most fantastic listening figures. It had the most amazing listeners. All you needed to do was sneeze, and you get a million texts from people just wanting to interact with you. And the giveaways that we did on the station, the songs that we played, it was just the most perfect place to work, and I absolutely loved working there. And it was like a dream come true to be on this massive commercial radio station that was just taking Wales by storm at that point.
Me and Wiggy never mentioned this off air on air, but he told me the story when I was down and seeing him a couple of weeks ago about the Real Radio Renegade competition you did.
Yeah, the Real Radio Renegade was brilliant. Yeah, it was that someone was somewhere in our transmission area and there would be clues, and he'd have a disguised voice, and people had to find him. And so they would, if you thought that you found the real renegade, you used to have to go up to the real renegade and say, "Are you the real radio renegade?" And he would say yes. And so we would, on the air, we would have listeners saying, "Oh, I think I might have seen him at the supermarket and stuff." And so we would then be able to, and this is the brilliance of real radio. It was a music radio station, and obviously cranking out the hits was what it was all about. But you were allowed to have fun. So I can remember one of our real radio renegades. He was allegedly at some supermarket in Swansea, say. And so someone phoned up, we think he might be in the supermarket. So I said, right, we'll go in to the supermarket then and ask if you can use the tannoy. So this is live on the radio. So this listener, hello, I'm on real radio. Can I use your tannoy, please? And so the person who's sitting in Asda went, yeah. So hands over the little tannoy mic. Bing bong. Hello, is the real radio renegade in here? Is what you get broadcasting over Asda and on the radio at the same time. And this was the genius of John Myers and John Simons and the way that they did radio, that they knew that this was great. This was great radio, and we were allowed to do it. And it was just the most fun.
Yeah, it's brilliant, and it's just old-fashioned radio at its best, and it's brilliant, and yeah, it's good, and it's nice. And what was it like working at Reel, and what was your highlight from Reel, and did you do any interviews at Reel?
I did, yeah. We had a handful of stars came through. So yeah, we had Kim Marsh, who at the time had been in Hearsay, and then obviously went on to become a fantastic actress in Waterloo Road and Coronation Street. She came in a couple of times, and we had Real, and I have no idea how it happened, but the Real Radio Christmas parties were the most fantastic things. And so we would all of the team from the Guardian Media Group, GMG, would be sent to a place. So one year it was Preston, one year it was Glasgow, another year it was Newcastle, where there would be a real radio presence or a smooth radio presence, and they would have these amazing parties. And one of the Christmas parties, Simply Red came and did a song, Mick Hucknall singing at our Christmas party. So, off air as well as on air, you were kind of surrounded by big stars.
I remember some of them saying they used to at Real Radio Christmas parties because he worked in the group for a bit. Tony Blackburn at one Christmas party.
Yeah, yeah. Tony Blackburn was there, and Gary Davis would be there.
Did you ever get to chat with any of those two?
I did, yeah. I met Gary when he was at Radio 1, and I think I'd met Tony when I was doing like a Noel's house party or something. So, but again, I could not claim to know these people at all well, but I'd been in their presence before. And so, it was lovely to be able to sort of catch up with them. But, Tony Blackburn, broadcasting royalty. I mean, crikey, what a lovely man.
Yeah, everybody's got a story to tell about good old Tony. Everybody who's in radio has got a good story to tell about Mr. Tony Blackburn because he's been there, he's done that. And he once told a guest of mine, Lynn Parson, that he has a swimming pool, but a massive size swimming pool at his house, but he hardly ever swims.
I can believe it. He doesn't have time. He's always on the radio.
Or he could have a talkathon for 2 days, and he was also in West Country Connection, the Wurzels music video, I Am a Cider Drinker.
Oh, how funny. I didn't know that. I did not know that.
Somebody showed it to me, and I'm like, that's Tony Blackburn.
Oh, how amazing. How amazing.
Yeah, and we're going to move on now. You were at Reel. How did you leave Reel after 4 years? How did that end?
It ended because I had been doing the evening show for quite a long time, and I've been standing in on other programs, and I sort of felt like I was never going to be given the drive time show or the breakfast show. And so I just thought, if I don't go now, I'm just going to stay here forever. And so at that time, I was having conversations with BBC Radio Wales, the BBC network down the road, and they then said, right, come and do some stuff here. And so it just felt like the right time to cross the divide and go back to the BBC. And unfortunately, it was doing the evening show again, which was fine, but it wasn't necessarily where I wanted to be, but it was back at the BBC, and so that was lovely. And then whilst I was at BBC Radio Wales, where I was doing the evening show, as I say, I live in Somerset, and so BBC Radio Somerset came to me and said, would you be interested in doing a Saturday morning show? And because I was doing the Monday to Friday in the evening, Saturday breakfast on a morning. Again, it was a BBC program. It was the shortest commute I'd ever had, having been living in Somerset and driving to Cardiff every day and stuff. And so I thought, well, yeah, no, I will do that then. And so that was how I then ended up back at the BBC, still at BBC Radio Somerset all these years on. But whilst I was at BBC Radio Wales, which I loved and very much enjoyed and got to work with some amazing people there, I then was offered the job of going to ITV West Country, the regional news program down in West Country, as the weather presenter down there. And so I had to weigh up the, do I stay with the BBC? Do I go and do ITV and see where that leads me? And so I just thought, well, I've got nothing to lose. So I went to ITV. So still keeping my BBC Radio Somerset show. So that was quite good. So I felt like I had a foot in both camps. And then ITV, I thought, well, I might not be very good at the weather. I might not be any good at this, but it's summer and it's Devon and Cornwall, which is where the West Country patch was. And so I just basically went and had a lovely summer where I toured Devon and Cornwall, and ITV paid me to go and do it and go and do live weather OBs from all sorts of different places. And as it turned out, I was sort of all right and fitted in quite nicely to the news output. And so then when Meridian were looking for another weather presenter, I then went and got that job. So, and then I did that for about 11 years. And that was when I was working with Fred Dangage down in
From
Southampton.
hell.
So, yeah. How, not hell. Fred Dangage from hell.
I,
How?
what was it like working with the children's TV presenter, Fred Dinage?
Fred was so lovely. I'd not really met him before, but Fred was someone who I grew up watching. He was proper telly legend. So he would do How, which was the TV show that then became How To. And he also used to do World of Sport, which was the ITV Saturday afternoon show. He would stand in for Dickie Davis on that. And so to be in the company of Fred was just great. And Fred, again, a very lovely man, very generous, very giving. And he was, I mean, in that patch, he had been on that TV. I was there when Fred celebrated 50 years of being on ITV in the South. And so to imagine the impression that he would have made on those viewers, there would have been people watching the programme, the nightly news programme that Fred was on and that I was on, who had never not known Fred Dinage be on that programme. And they had grown up and their children were growing up watching. That is the legend of Fred Dinage. And he couldn't have been nicer. Everyone at ITV Meridian. Initially, I was working on Thames Valley, which was the bit that did a bit of Berkshire and a bit of Oxfordshire, and so that was Wesley Smith, who had been at ITV Central for many years, and Mary Green, who had been at Meridian. So they were my two co-hosts, and they were just amazing. And then in the other bits of Meridian were Fred Dinage and Debbie Thrower, again, a very well-respected broadcaster. She'd done BBC Breakfast, she'd done Radio 2, and so she was doing the show with Fred for that bit of the region. And then in the third bit of the region, you had two of the most amazing presenters, Sangeeta and Phil. Phil went on to be the Meridian political correspondent, and so he was great. And Sangeeta became the main host of the show with Fred, and so myself and Fred and Sangeeta were the sort of the trio that were on tea times for best part of a decade. And it just, again, such a lovely family atmosphere. Everyone was there to help and support and make sure that we all had the best time that we could. And we made, that program was already essential viewing. There would be people that they would set their clock for 6 o'clock and they would sit down and they would put ITV News Meridian on, and to be invited into people's living rooms every day and to be part of that family of broadcasting. And there were some days, there were some really hard stories that we had to tell, and there were some days when it was all light and frothy, and to be there at those key moments for those viewers that is the beauty of being a broadcaster. That is the luck of being a broadcaster, that you are there with those viewers who, as I say, they don't have to watch you. They choose to put you on. They choose to invite you into their living rooms, and you become a part of their family, and they become a part of your family. And the interaction that we got from the weather that I used to do, we used to sort of get people sending in weather pictures, and they would be funny pictures as well as pictures of lovely scenery. We would do random themes of clouds that look like other things and faces in unexpected places where people would suddenly go, oh, look, that looks like a face. Might have been in nature, might have been in their back bedroom. And we did all of these funny things, and the viewers came along with us. And I, again, so very lucky that my timing was right, that we were at a stage where you could just email over a photo and it could have been on the telly that night. Just amazing.
Yeah. And after all them good times and all them difficult times, you leave ITV in 2017 and you end up at the BBC.
Yeah, I'd been working at BBC Radio Somerset for oh gosh, I don't know, 11, 12 years before that. I'd doing the Saturday breakfast show, which I'd continued to do, and they would occasionally say, "Oh, do you think you'd ever want to come here full time?" And and one time they said it again, and it just felt like the right time. And as the way the world turned out, it was a really good time. My children had grown up in Somerset, and my daughter had already gone off to university, and my son was going off to university. And so when I was living in Somerset but working at Meridian, I was basically doing getting up at sort of 5 o'clock in the morning to be in the car for 6 to be at work for sort of half 8, 9, then working a full day. The program would be on air until half 6. Some nights I would be doing a live from somewhere like Dover or anywhere in the Meridian patch. And so I wasn't getting home till like 9, 10 o'clock at night. And so to have missed out on so much of the real life when my son was going off to university, it felt like the right time to be home so that at least my wife could remember that she was married to somebody. And so that was then why the time was right to think, actually, you know what, I've had a fantastic time at Meridian, but maybe I should go and see what it's like being a broadcast journalist and doing more newsy stuff on the radio, which is what I now do on BBC Radio Somerset. We do a sort of a daily magazine program where we cover news again, very serious news, very hard news, and then we do light and frothy news. And again, we have a massively interactive listenership who get involved with the things that we talk about, whether they're serious things or whether they are sort of light-hearted things. And and I'm there just to sort of manage the way that it all sort of flows. And as someone who is able to ask some amazing people some incredible questions, whether they are famous people or whether they are people who have found themselves in a very unusual situation. Maybe they have had massive health dramatic things happen to them that have changed their life and changed their focus on life. And you get people who have lost loved ones who want to give back to charities. And so every single day, I get to ask these people the most amazing questions, and they trust us to tell us their stories. And I mean, again, I keep saying it, and I apologise for being repetitive, but I am so lucky and so blessed that I am doing the job that I'm doing, because it's such a unique job to be able to just be paid to ask questions and talk to people. I mean, what a lovely thing to do.
Nice. And you've been at the BBC and you've been doing this for a long time now. What, who would you like to thank and what's been your greatest achievement over them years?
I mean, but in terms of personally, my greatest achievement is that I'm still working. I think, I'm ever so lucky that I've had opportunities, and I have had some amazing, random calls out of the blue from people saying, "Would do you think you might fancy doing this?" And so to be still all these years on, it's 1987 is when I started at Radio T. So next year that'll be 40 years as a professional broadcaster. And in that time, I've worked at Network BBC, I've worked at Network ITV, I've had the opportunity to meet some incredibly famous people, I've had the opportunity to travel to some amazing places and do the most amazing things. So, my for me personally, my biggest achievement is that I, as a small boy, thought that's what I want to do, and was lucky enough to be given the opportunities to be able to do it. And nearly 40 years on, here I am able to say it's still my career. I'm still a broadcaster, and in that time I have grown from being a DJ who played pop records to a presenter on television, and I've presented news programs on the television. I've presented newsy stuff on the radio. All of those things that I would never have imagined have sort of come my way, and so I feel very lucky about that. In terms of the people who have been massively supportive, the list is just way too long. The every place that I have worked, I have had bosses who have supported me. I have had colleagues who have been they've got what I'm about, and they have helped me to make sure that what I'm doing is right for what they want. I mean, I go back to the BBC and children's BBC, and Andy Peters is without a shadow of a doubt one of the most influential people in my career, because he came and we started working together at a time when I sort of knew what I was doing, but I wasn't brilliant at it yet. And Andy was able to with his brilliance lead me in a way that meant that I just got better and better. And that period of time and the influence that he had on me was quite amazing. From then on, I have worked for some of the most brilliant bosses in broadcasting, who, John Myers, who we were talking about, and John Simons. They had a vision of, this is what we want to do, and we're just going to go and do it. And they did it, and to have been part of that was quite incredible. Pat Hubbard at the BBC when I started, the people at ITV who took me on. It was a man called Peter Basil-Jett, who had the most amazing career already when he invited me to come and join the team at GMTV, and he then went on to he was he's credited as being the father of reality television, because he is the one who commissioned Big Brother for Channel 4. All of these people that I have been able to work with and lucky to work with, it's just incredible. And none of them have ever gone, oh no, wait a minute, no, you can't do that. They have only ever gone, right, okay, this is what you're good at, this is what you like doing, right, how can we make it fit so that what you do fits with what we want to do, and let's see where this takes us. And as I say, touch wood, nearly 40 years on, I'm still here. Could all end tomorrow, but hey ho.
And what's been the best interview you've done? And what track is your guilty pleasure? And what track would you chuck in the dustbin of doom?
Oh my god. Okay, so gosh, best interview I've done.
By the
That
way,
is
Paul
that is
Robinson said he'd chuck in the track Dustbin of Doom, Mr.
okay.
Blobby.
Well, but Mr. Blobby, I'm not going to start a fight with Paul Robinson, and nor am I here to defend Mr. Blobby. But in his time, Mr. Blobby was an icon for some of the nation. That you can't knock it, and the fact that it was a Christmas number one, which is a number one single, is quite an amazing thing to get. Christmas number one. That is, Kylie Minogue only just got it last year, and she'd waited all that long to have a Christmas number one, and Mr. Blobby got it. So I have no axe to grind against Mr. Blobby. The song that I cannot explain why a bit of me groans when I play it, and please forgive me, Eddie Reader, if you are listening to this, which I think is probably highly unlikely, but you never know, is Fairground Attraction Perfect. I do not know why. It's one of those songs I've sort of never got on with, and obviously it's a very popular song. It was massively successful in its time. It has stood the test of time, and we play it a fair bit at the BBC Radio Somerset. But a little bit of me goes, oh, there's something about this song that just doesn't work for me. It might be the way that it starts, and as a broadcaster, it's very hard to sort of talk into it in a way that makes it sound cohesive. So maybe that's what it is. So that I'll put that in the dustbin of doom. Not because it's a bad record, but
And
just
what
because
would you
it's,
put as your all-time guilty pleasure?
oh gosh, all-time guilty pleasure. How can I pick an all-time favourite song? I shall go with the Bare Naked Ladies and their song "If I Had $1 Million," because it's very cheerful. It's lovely. The sentiment of it is what we do on a daily basis of thinking, oh, it would be lovely to win the lottery. What would you do with the money?
Yep.
And they make the fantastic joke, which I love and still steal, which is, I would buy some art, maybe a Picasso or a Garfunkel. I mean, that's genius comedy right there. in a pop song.
A good friend of mine, Darren Short of the media company, media site, who has been on this show. That's his favourite song as well.
Oh, well, there you go. Well, what is it? They say great minds think alike, fools never differ. So I'll let you work out which
Neil
category we
Bentley,
fall
who was
into.
on Capital, his favourite was Bros.
Bros were great. Bros were
When Will
great.
I Be Famous?
Yeah, it's a great
Mine
song.
is probably at the moment King of Wishful Thinking, Go West.
Oh, yeah, no, that's lovely. That's a brilliant song. Yeah, from Pretty Woman, the movie.
Yeah, because Lynn Parson was saying as well in their edition, I must send you that edition at some stage. Lynn Parson was saying about the time that from the little Lady Butterfly, the Pretty Woman bit where he lifts her arms, him and Aaron Fluff Freeman were crying with laughter for that song.
Oh, how funny.
Because
How
she
funny.
was just sat with the headphones on, Aaron Fluff Freeman, and they were just crying with laughter. That bit from Pretty Woman where he lifts her up.
I don't remember it. I haven't seen it since like 1990. So I'll have to watch it. I have to get the DVD out. Is that still a thing?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm looking at the moment because Lynn Parson told me to watch. I've never seen it because one of my favourite actors was in it, George Curl, who was Arthur Daly in
Of
Minder.
course. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Did you ever get to meet any of the Minder guys?
I didn't get to meet any of the Minder guys, but when my wife and I got married, we lived in a village in Buckinghamshire where Dennis Waterman lived. And so when we went to the Indian restaurant for one of our first nights out there, we were told that Dennis Waterman came in. He never did in the time that I was there, so I never saw him there. But I do feel like we have that special connection.
I
So,
know that Luxembourg legend Tony Prince used to play golf with him in Spain.
oh wow, that's a great name drop.
Yeah, and it's brilliant, and I enjoy being on the radio, and it's great to have you on. And my last little bit is, what advice would you give to your 10-year-old self, and where do you see yourself in 10 years' time? And my last little bit is, what advice would you give to the next gen?
The next gen, the advice that I could give them based on sort of my experiences probably doesn't fit in the world now because if you are someone who, like I was when I was a young wannabe broadcaster, the only way to do it would be to get a job on the radio or on the television. Whereas now you can do a podcast, you can do a YouTube channel, and you can be as, if not more successful than someone who did the terrestrial television. So I feel that, no one is ever going to come to me for advice, the next generation, because I'm some old man who is from a past way of doing it. So, but the advice that I would give to my 10-year-old self would be, well, not my 10-year-old self, my teenage self. Your acne will clear up eventually, is the thing that I would say. And so, because that obviously gave me a lot of stress when I was much younger, and I would probably tell myself it'll all be fine. There'll be good days, there'll be bad days, there will be opportunities that will come your way, and there will be stuff that doesn't. But all in all, it'll all be fine. And to look at where I am now and look back at some of the things that I've done and how lovely of you to chat to me about them and remind me of them. I've had the life that I dreamed that I wanted when I was the young boy thinking I want to be Noel Edmonds. It didn't quite go to plan, but my goodness me, some of the things that I've been able to do along the way are just incredible. And the
Um,
people that I have met and the lovely friends that I have made, that's what it's all about.
Brilliant. And I've just dropped Wiggy a message asking how he is, and he says he kept asking me the other day, "Have you done the interview with him yet? Have you done the interview with him yet?"
Brilliant. Well, tell him yes, and but don't tell him the most boring man in the world. Wish I'd never bothered. If only it
Tell
was good
him.
Daddy Al Nichols.
I'll
Cool.
tell him you'll be on the way to Barry soon.
Yeah, no, do definitely.
You'll have to go up there because it's a lovely place. It's a home of Gavin and Stacey. He'll take you on the Gavin and Stacey tour,
Yeah, no, that would be lovely.
and he may even get you breakfast if you're lucky.
Well, let's not
Pulling,
push your luck. That's fine.
but he'll take you on the Gavin and Stacey tour
Yeah, no, brilliant, brilliant.
because it's a brilliant series and it's brilliant and one of my favorite. It's such an honor to have you on because I've had lots of other people on who have been on Radio One, and you're the first proper children's TV presenter.
Oh, bless you. Well, it was very kind of you to reach out to me, and like I say, I hope I wasn't too dull, and
No,
I hope it all comes together well.
and
Oh,
yeah,
excuse me.
don't forget, yeah, it's brilliant interview. Don't forget that we've reached the end of the interview. Don't forget this will be available in full as a podcast, and the best bit's right here on the Ben Lister Conversation radio show on your favourite station. So join me same time, same place next time for another coveted interview. But for now, that's a wrap. Back to the studio. Be out. Bye bye.